Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming to the Septic Secrets webinar. I have Jeff Grugel with the Minnesota Department of Health and Sarah Heeger from the University of Minnesota, who are going to give a presentation on septic systems, subsurface sewage treatment systems, SSTS. This is kind of an important subject. First, they can be expensive if they're not maintained well. They have a shorter lifespan, and Jeff and Sarah will get into all of that. It's also a really key area for protecting lakes. A lot of the stuff that goes down the drain ends up in the septic system and can end up in the lake, which is a problem. There are many septic systems in the state that are no longer working well, and they are leaching into lakes. About 10 years ago, Minnesota Lakes and Rivers, I'm Jeff Forster with Minnesota Lakes and Rivers, we worked with the Department of Agriculture, and they were able to get a loan program up that goes through the counties and will provide, depending on your county, either low or no interest loans to upgrade a septic system. So, there's a real nice incentive there to get your system tested, to get it up to snuff and get it working well to protect water in the lake that you've made such an investment in. This, for a lake association, I have seen different lake associations approach this subject with their members. Some have better luck than others. And that's kind of a different topic related, but email me if you want to talk more about that topic, about how, as a lake association, you can work with local landowners to encourage them to get their system tested to make sure that it's working, and b help facilitate the work once it happens if they need an upgrade. If you look on you should have a couple of different choices here. There's an attendee chat. So if you want to ask a question, go ahead and chat. Use that chat feature. I am going to sign out here in a minute, but I'll still be on the webinar and I'll watch the chat. And when a few questions kind of get lined up and there's a break, I'll maybe pop in with the questions, or we'll do them at the end. If you want to give us a thumbs up to let us know that you can hear us, or a smiley face if you can hear us, or thumbs down if you can't. Okay, that seems to be working, and it seems like people can hear us. So I will say goodbye to you now. I will be here, but you won't be able to see me. And I'll turn it over to you, Sarah.
All right. Thank you so much, Jeff. It was great. We had originally planned this event a long time ago as a webinar because it's a great way to reach people when you can't get all over the state. And it was almost fortuitous that we all can't be together right now. So this is a really great opportunity to provide information to you all remotely, which is how most of us are living right now anyway. So with that, we are going to be talking both about private wells and septic systems. At the University of Minnesota, my work focuses on septic systems, so I'm going to be covering that portion of the content, and Jeff Grugel with MDH will be covering the portion on your private well. So the funding for this program primarily has come through the Minnesota Department of Health. We received a grant to do both in-person and this webinar event. Also some funding coming directly from our program. We donated a little bit of time as well. So this probably one isn't relevant today because we're all muted, but we use the same set we use when we're in person. I guess it reminds me to shut off my cell phone. But with that, what we're going to talk about today, we are going to spend a little time talking about what chemicals of emerging concern are. And there's a couple reasons for that. One is the funding for this actual training came through a program at MDH that focuses on new contaminants that we need to be concerned about. Then we're going to talk about what a good septic system is and what a good drinking water system is. And then we're going to come back to talking about management of your septic system. But keep in mind, the entire goal of this program is to protect our water. So for the most part, we are often focusing on groundwater when we think about wells and septics. But we also have to keep in mind that the water from our septic system is often moving laterally to a lake, river, or stream. It's not always going to our deeper groundwater. So it's important from several perspectives to have a good septic system. So the link you'll see on the right, I'm sure it's kind of small and you're not probably going to write it all down right now, but if you go to our main website at the University of Minnesota, that's the septic.umn.edu, we do have a fact sheet that's present. That fact sheet you'll see kind of highlights what we're covering today. And after this event, Jeff is going to be sending an email out to you all with the link for this. So, and it also has links to several other websites that we're going to mention during the course. So just keep your eye out from an email from Jeff. And I think, Jeff, you mentioned, he just chatted me that he has a quiz question for you all. It kind of helps us understand where you're all coming from within Minnesota. Most of the time, so you can go ahead and click on one of these tabs and tell us where you are. So usually when we're doing this, it's all in one location, right? We're all around one city or one community, but I expected that with this one, we would actually be quite spread out, right? Because the members of this association are kind of all over the state. So it looks right now there's a pretty good tie between people living in the metropolitan area and then central Minnesota. And it's always hard to kind of figure out how exactly you split into Minnesota and up into districts, but pretty good representation across Minnesota. So it's interesting to see that. All right, so with that, we'll move into our presentation, and thanks for answering that. So we're just going to touch on this first topic of what are chemicals of emerging concern. When you look at this picture, it kind of gives you some examples. So when you look at things like the toilet, we see birth control pills, right? So those would be estrogen-related compounds. Pharmaceuticals and other care products, the Teflon from our pans, the fire retardants from our, in this case, our couch. All of these are new things that we are finding in our waters. So we just want to, again, briefly talk about what are these chemicals of emerging concern. In general, it is something where it's somewhere where it doesn't belong. So these CECs are substances that they're being released, or we have found them, or they even have the potential to be entering our waters here in Minnesota, either our groundwater or surface water. The challenge is these chemicals do not have a health-based guidance limit. So for instance, one of the ones we're all familiar with, or most of us are, that has a limit is nitrate nitrogen. So the federal government has set the standard that you can't have more than 10 milligrams per liter of nitrate nitrogen. With some of these new pharmaceuticals and personal care products, we have not yet determined at low levels, is there a risk to public health? So these sometimes pose a real or perceived health threat. And it could be also that there are new or challenging health or exposure information coming out all the time. So for the most part, many of these are things that we are washing down the drain. So why are we finding these new contaminants? And I believe the number one reason is the first bullet you see, is that we usually measure things in the lab at parts per million. So that's milligrams per liter. Well, now we have new techniques that we can measure in parts per trillion. So that's a really small amount. So that what that means is we are looking for new substances in our water that we weren't looking before. We also have new substances that are going into our wastewater every single day, right? Like I like to think about like the aisle, at Walmart. How many different cleaners there are, right? Or how many medications are available, that weren't available. And then there's things we're using, new things every day. So here again just shows some of the examples: antibiotics, hormones, psychoactive drugs, lipid regulators, fragrances. The next time you open your laundry bottle and you smell that smell, many of those things are actually synthetic chemicals. And when you start talking about things that are man-made, sometimes it is more challenging for nature to break those down, and sometimes they persist in our wastewater. So that really is the overview of what CECs are. What we're really going to focus on, though, is how, as you as a consumer, you as a property owner, the best thing you can do, first of all, is think about what's going down the drain. So this picture shows the CECs start at your house, right? At least that's the portion you have control over. And then the question is, what happens when they get out to your septic system? There is the opportunity for treatment within your septic system. So the words you see below there are degradation and absorption. So many of these contaminants are actually being treated in the soil. The soil has a very dynamic ability to treat many things. But it is possible that some of those contaminants could be reaching groundwater. So that's why it's also very important to have a good well system. So what you can really do as a property owner is have a good septic system, have a good well, and maintain it. So that's what we are going to focus on for the rest of the next couple hours here. So again, a good septic system, what is that? Well, first and foremost, it shouldn't back up in your home. It should never surface in your yard or on your water body into a water body. So no spongy yards, no pipes going to the ditch, right? You should have a good watertight septic tank. And these three things are all very obvious, right? We all know those are things we can understand. The last one is a little harder to see or understand, and that is it needs to have the right separation before it hits a saturated zone or confining layer. So that confining layer, for instance, could be bedrock. So if you're living in southeastern Minnesota or up on the North Shore. But for many of us in Minnesota, due to our high water tables and being the land of 10,000 lakes, we have a lot of water. So when that means we also have a lot of perched water tables and heavier soils. So that is another critical part of having a good septic system. So a septic system always starts at the home, at the structure, because we are the ones who put the waste down the drain. So we really do impact how that septic system performs. So from that, we move out to a septic tank, and that's where the treatment starts. It's not where all of it happens, but the first component of the septic tank is really important to the overall treatment process. And then finally, we go out to the drain field, right? So in that drain field, you'll see, again, we have our laterals flowing, and we are required again to have, with new systems again, a 3-foot separation to the limiting condition. So your system in your backyard may not look exactly like this, right? There's a lot of iterations, but all septic systems have these 3 pieces, right? They have the house, they have a tank, and then finally, they have a soil treatment system. So starting with that septic tank, the number one job of your septic tank is to catch the solids. When it comes to catching the solids, it's going to decompose organic material. So much of the waste that we put down the drain is organic. So the bacteria that are actually living in our guts continue to break down the wastewater in the septic tank. But there are some things we flush that can't be broken down, so the septic tank is going to store those. The septic tank is a natural stratifier, and what that means is the heavy solids are going to settle out to the bottom. The lighter things like soaps and oils and greases are going to float to the top. And what's going to leave the septic tank is going to be a much cleaner effluent because many of the solids will have settled out. Do keep in mind, again, if any of you have ever smelt your septic tank, what you are actually smelling is anaerobic digestion, that the bacteria living in that tank are eating up food in that tank itself. So here kind of shows what a typical septic system or septic tank may look like. You'll see the 3 layers in the tank, right? The scum at the top, the sludge, and then the liquid layer in the middle. What you'll also notice, a few other things about this tank is one, those risers. So not all of your systems may look like this, but new modern septic systems will have those risers to grade. So right around the year 2010, the code changed to facilitate maintenance. Now all those risers are brought to grade. With some of our older systems, the risers may be buried 12 inches in the ground, sometimes deeper, which is not ideal because you're going to need to get into that tank at some time to do maintenance, and it's a lot easier to do that if the tank isn't buried. So a couple other things to note about this tank is, again, on the way into the tank, here is the inlet, right? There's actually a baffle here. So that might be a wall or a pipe that directs the wastewater to go in and then across the tank. We don't want it to short circuit because the tank is designed based on detention time, and that's how many days that the effluent is going to stay in the tank. So there's typically also a baffle on the way out. The purpose of the baffle on the way out is even more important because it makes sure that this scum that is sitting on the top of the liquid layer doesn't go out to the soil treatment system. The other thing that this tank has that a lot of older tanks don't have is an effluent screen or baffle. It's just a screening device to make sure that if there are any solids that have stayed in suspension, that they'll be filtered out in the tank versus going out to the drain field. So here's a picture of some different effluent screens that can be in tanks. So you'll notice, again, the one on the left and the one on the right, they're black, right? They're dirty because over time, what they will do is catch solids. The one in the middle, again, is a brand new one going into the tank. So I saw someone did ask a question about what if their riser doesn't come to grade. All tanks do have manhole accesses, like you can see here in the picture on the left. It's just that some of them are buried in the ground. So what that means is when it's time for your system to have maintenance, they're going to need to dig that up. And we're going to talk more about maintenance, and I'll get to that additive question I also saw pop up. But they're going to need to be able to get to your manhole. When they do dig it up, that is a good time to consider adding a riser to grade, because then the next time you need maintenance, they won't have to dig it up and it will be at grade. So here shows that separation to the limiting condition. So where we measure that, again, is from the bottom of your system. So with a lot of our systems, if any of you were there when it went in, they actually put a rock into the bottom of your system to help spread out the sewage. There's now other components that can be used in lieu of rock, but they measure it again from where the sewage is hitting the soil because that's where the treatment happens. So that's where that separation needs to be measured. Well, sometimes we don't naturally have 3 feet under the surface. So really all a mound system is an elevated drain field where they bring in sand to achieve the vertical separation, to achieve that 3 feet. But there's nothing else really fancy about it. It's just the use of sand to achieve the required 3 feet of separation. So the other thing I just wanted to quickly talk about is how septic systems do treat wastewater. Sometimes there is I would view it to be a misperception that wastewater treatment plants do a better job. When in fact, a properly operating septic system, the levels of the contaminants we're going to talk about is very clean. That's how a septic system deals with pathogens, so that would be viruses and bacteria, how it deals with the solid component of our wastewater, the nutrients, and finally, at the end, we'll talk a little bit about how it deals with chemicals. So the other thing to think about is where are these problems treated? Are they treated in the septic tank or are they treated out in the soil? For most of the things we're going to talk about, the answer is both. That we need both a properly operating tank and soil treatment system to deal with most of the components. So first, we're going to look at pathogens. So I think now we're all very aware of viruses, right? So our current epidemic with COVID is a virus. So if we are sick or we are ill, we are shedding viruses and bacteria, could even be worms and protozoa in our human waste. We all know it can be coming from other sources, but if we're talking about wastewater, that is what we're concerned about. So it has an impact to human health. These bacteria, harmful bacteria and viruses, have difficulty living in an oxygen-rich environment. So when we have a soil treatment system with 3 feet of dry soil, and that is very important, that soil has to be unsaturated. When it is unsaturated, that means it's aerobic, and it means that the bacteria will be killed off in the soil. It is not actually, again, it's not going to be available. Those are not going to be removed in the septic tank because the septic tank is anaerobic and it operates very similar to our guts and our septic tanks. So we really don't remove it in the tank, we remove it out in the soil. So moving to the solids component, these are digested and undigested animal and vegetable material. There also can be some organic solids and synthetic organic compounds. So if these organic solids reached your lake or your nearest river, they would take oxygen out of that water body to break it down. And so the chemical way we can measure that in a lab is called the biochemical oxygen demand. So we really need to remove this organic material before it gets to a lake, river, or stream, or the groundwater. So how we treat this is some of these organic solids are going to settle out in the septic tank. If you had one of those effluent screens, it'll limit the passage of those solids out to the soil treatment system. But some of these of this organic matter is going to serve as a good food source. That when you start spreading your sewage out in your drain field, soil bacteria come to eat it. It's kind of like the picnic. You don't need to invite the ants, they just come. And it's amazing. The soil is full of good bacteria and fungi that will actually eat up this organic material out in the soil. And we actually size the system appropriately to deal with the amount of organic material that's present in the wastewater. Unfortunately, not all of the solids we put down the drain are organic. So organic means that the soil microorganisms can eat it. So inorganic solids would be fibers from synthetic clothing, such as the lint off your washing machine, minerals, metals, and salts from soil material, plumbing systems, even makeup. So these things are inert and not subject to decay, which means the soil microorganisms can't break them down. If they get to a water body, it causes the clouding of water, which is called turbidity. And if they make it out to your drain field, over time, they can cause the plugging of your soil pores. So this isn't a day 1 problem. This is kind of a, year 20 or 30 problem. Eventually, every septic system will need to be replaced. It's just like anything else around your house, right? Your furnace, your roof, you name it, all of those things we have eventually need replacement. And a septic system is the same, is that it does have a life expectancy and it will need to be replaced. How often really gets at how you use your system. How many people live in your home? How well do you maintain it? It's kind of like asking, when do you need a new car? Well, it depends, right? So these inorganic solids, how we treat them is, again, we hope to hold as many back in the septic tank as possible because we do know that over time these can cause the soil pores to plug. So moving on to phosphorus. So if you see a lake that looks like this, right, it's nice and green. Well, that's not nice, right? So that is, phosphorus is the real motivator for the growth of weed and algae in our lakes, ponds, and streams. We are the primary source of phosphorus in wastewater, meaning we excrete this nutrient. We eat food that has phosphorus in it. We don't need all that phosphorus, so it comes out with our urine. If you were using a garbage disposal, though, and you were putting a food down the drain, that food would also have phosphorus. And it is still present in few household detergents. It's not in any of our laundry soap here in Minnesota. We've banned that. but it can be in some dishwashing and other detergents, so such as your dishwashing detergent. The good news is a properly operating septic system will remove that phosphorus. Phosphorus has a very strong affinity to attach and precipitate in the soil. So if you, again, have a good modern septic system with 3 feet of soil, you have a lot of phosphorus removing capacity out in that drain field. So then moving on to nitrogen. So nitrogen is another nutrient. And again, we are the main source of nitrogen in our system. It's in our urine. It comes from, again, the breakdown of the food we eat. It is also present in some household cleaners and chemicals. For instance, if you use any sort of ammonia-based cleaner, ammonia is a form of nitrogen. The biggest impact that nitrogen has here when we're talking about septic systems is on drinking water quality. So that's that 10 milligram per liter nitrate standard I mentioned. Here in Minnesota, our lakes are phosphorus deficient, meaning how much algae will grow is based on the phosphorus inputs. But oceans, the growth of algae in ocean environments is tied to nitrogen. So if you've ever seen like the red tides in Florida, or there's been big issues out in the Chesapeake Bay or out in New York, there the nitrate and nitrogen in general coming from septic systems is concerning. So how we deal with nitrogen in septic systems is different septic systems remove different amounts of nitrogen. So in general, it is also the biggest reason why we have a setback from our well to our from our septic system is to allow for some dilution of that in groundwater. But there are areas that do need advanced treatment. So the best example I have of this is the city of Afton. So downtown Afton recently got upgraded and they got a community septic system. So it serves kind of the downtown portion of Afton. That system was designed for somewhere around 50 or 60,000 gallons of water a day to go out to that septic systems. So when you think about it, though, think if you were right down gradient from that, would 50 feet be enough? No, right? So actually those bigger systems are required to have greater setbacks, but they're also required to treat nitrogen to a higher level. The dilution isn't something we can count on when we're talking about such large flows. So there are parts of Minnesota, due to the size of the systems and the geology, where we may have to look at advanced systems, because there are systems that you can put in that can get the nitrogen level down to 10 before it even goes into the soil. So the last one I wanted to touch on is, again, how do septic systems deal with cleaners and medications? The other thing to think about, though, is that when you are on a septic system, you generally, unless you're on a cluster system, but most of us aren't, right? We have our individual septic systems. We do not have the benefit of dilution. So, right, when you're in a city and you're all hooked together, if I dump a gallon of bleach, does the wastewater treatment plant know? And the general answer to that is no, they don't know, because by the time everybody's waste mixed together, it's diluted. But when you're on a septic system, if you dumped a gallon of bleach down the drain, that could really harm the good bacteria out in the system. Also, in lower amounts, we have data showing that it can affect the aquatic food chain, particularly impacting species reproduction, and we're even finding this in our drinking water. So for instance, if I asked you, how much atrazine would you like in your drinking water, what would you say? I can't hear you all, but I know most of you would say 0, right? You don't want any atrazine in your drinking water. But we are finding water, both tap water from municipalities and even potentially well water, that has trace amounts of atrazine, right? So we're talking again about a very small amount, but thinking about to what I just asked you is we didn't want any of it, right? So how we deal with this in septic tanks is some of these things could be stored in our septic tank until they're pumped. But there's more and more data being gathered that many of these chemicals, cleaners, and medicines are actually being removed as it travels through the septic system. It gets at that microbial community living in the soil. The long detention time we have in septic systems allows for many of these contaminants to be broken down. So that again was the overview of what a septic system is. Jeff's going to come up next and talk about what a good drinking water system is and your well. And then I'm going to come back and I'm going to talk about maintenance with septic systems. I'll be sure to cover the additive. I also saw a question about garbage disposals come up that we'll certainly talk about during that presentation, my second part of this. So I'll be back in a little bit.
Thanks, Sarah. She said, my name is Jeff Grugel. I work with the Minnesota Department of Health in the Water Well Management Program. I'm here today to talk to you about wells and what is a good drinking water system. Today's topics are going to include well construction and what a typical well will look like, groundwater protection, what you can do to protect your well's water quality, and water testing. Here's a picture of a newly constructed well. It has a 4-inch diameter well casing. The wellhead is about a foot above the ground surface. It has a waterproof cap with rubber gasketed on there, and it has a well tag with a unique Minnesota well number on it. Here's a picture of an older existing well. It has a jet pump hooked up to an older well. Typically, you'll find these systems in your basement, possibly in a basement offset, a well pit, or maybe a pump house. Here's a picture of a dug well or a well in a pit. Dug wells typically have very little watertight casing to prevent contamination from entering in the well. They work by allowing water to seep in through the sides and through the bottom. And they are more susceptible to contamination because of that. Wells and pits also have a tendency to accumulate debris and have a tendency to flood. That's why we do not allow wells to be constructed in pits any longer. Typical well construction methods include mud rotary, which is the most common. Wells are also constructed with air rotary or cable tool. When you hire a contractor to come in, they'll come in to your site with a drilling rig. They will raise the mast up into the air, and they will drill down into the formation where they think that they can obtain enough water to provide water for the system. That was pretty quick, so I'd like to go over it a little bit more detail. I see my slides are a little different than what they normally are, so I'm just going to go through, summarize this. What happens is water will be pumped in through the drill stem, through the inside of the drill stem, and it will recirculate around the outside of it and bring the cuttings up to the ground surface. When they get down to the desired depth, they'll remove that drill stem, and that just shows the cuttings being removed still. They will remove the drill stem, and then they'll insert a casing with a well screen. As you can see, they'll place crack around the well screen, which allows more water to enter in through the well screen, and they'll provide a seal on top of that gravel pack. After that, they will continue the drilling process or the construction process and insert a smaller diameter pipe down to the top of that seal. On the ground surface, they'll be mixing up a batch of what we call grout. It's either a mixture of bentonite clay or neat cement grout. They'll pump that in through that pipe from the bottom to the top and seal up that space. Go back one here. Once they get that space sealed up, they're going to remove that pipe from the space there. And that's very important to get that seal in place properly, because that prevents surface water from running along the outside of the casing. Because during construction, typically they'll drill a hole that's approximately 8 inches in diameter, and then they will insert a 4-inch diameter casing in that, so that leaves a space around the outside of the well casing in between the borehole wall and the well casing. So we want to make sure that that gets sealed up so that there's no contamination that enters alongside the well. After that, they will use compressed air and water and jet out the screen. This will remove the fine material that was deposited during the drilling process and provide a graded sand that's more coarse along the screen, and it gets gradually finer as you go away from the screen. This will act as a filter to filter out additional sand or silts that are present naturally in the formation. I'd like to talk a little bit about groundwater and some terminology here. Groundwater is water that is contained in the soil or in the bedrock. An aquifer is soil or rock that stores and transmits water. And then we have confining layers, which are soil or rock that restricts water. And clay is typically the most common confining layer. Talk a little bit about the hydrologic or the water cycle. Here's the diagram explaining the hydrologic or the water cycle. We all know that evaporated water falls to the ground in the form of rain or snow. As this rain hits the uneven landscape, it'll run off the hills and flow through the rivers and streams to a point of low elevation, such as a lake, and eventually into the ocean. The part you don't see is underground. As the water soaks into the soil, it'll move vertically until it reaches the water table. From that point, it will begin to flow horizontally to a point of discharge. This groundwater flow will typically, not always, but usually follow the same direction you see on the ground surface. Some of it will reach the point of discharge into the same lakes and rivers. And as water evaporates into the air, the cycle starts over again. This slide shows how potential contamination sources can enter and move through the groundwater system, very similar to rainfall. As you can see, there are two wells on the right-hand side that are in close proximity to the contamination source. What happens is, if you look at it, the one well is located at an area where it is down gradient from the contamination source, and one well is located at a higher elevation, which is up gradient from the contamination source. The one that's down gradient is obviously more susceptible to contamination because the contaminant is flowing in that same direction. Thus, we like to see wells located on properties at a higher elevation than sewer systems or any other source of contamination. If you look on the left-hand side of the screen, there's a water well and an abandoned well. Abandoned wells can bypass the natural filtering capacity of the soil, and they can act as a direct conduit for contamination to enter into the groundwater. That's why we like to see all the unsealed wells get sealed up by a licensed well contractor to stop that from happening. This is a diagram of the setback distances that we require for new well construction. It's a little small. The diagram's a little small. It might be hard to read for some people. If you want to go onto our website and the Minnesota Department of Health Well Management website, you can look under the Owner's Guide to Wells, and it'll have this picture in there, and it will be able to show you all the setback distances that are required. A good principle for wellhead protection is to keep the well and away from sources of contamination. So that is what this picture depicts. A little bit about groundwater contamination. Water easily dissolves contaminants on the ground and carries them downward. Shallow wells and wells near contamination sources have the most potential for it to be contaminated. And nitrate is the most common human-controlled groundwater contaminant, and it moves readily with the water. The good news is that soils do a very good job of filtering out most forms of contamination. And as we talked about earlier, confining layers such as clay, they limit downward movement of water and the surface contaminants. I'd like to talk a little bit about wells and plumbing and maintenance. All submersible pumps that are present have an electrical wire that runs down to the pump for operational purposes. These electrical wires are covered by a conduit that fits tightly into the well cap. The well cap, that connection there is a tight fit, and it's a watertight fit. But what happens is these conduits are susceptible to breakage. And oftentimes they get hit by a lawnmower or some other vehicle, and it'll crack the electrical conduit. As you see on all three of these pictures, all three conduits are cracked right underneath the well cap. This allows for spiders and bugs and critters and things to crawl in. They have an access point there that they can get inside of the well. All wells are required to have a screen vent on it. The vent functions for two different purposes. One is it equilibrates the pressure in the well when the pump comes on, and the other reason for the vent is that it vents off any gases that may be dissolved in the groundwater. They all have screens on them to prevent the bugs and critters from getting inside of these vents. But if you look at the well on the right-hand side, it has an overlapping old-fashioned style cover that we used to allow prior to 1992. But in 1992, we are no longer allowing those type of covers. Basically, they're an overlapping cover that does have a vent under there, but it does not have a screen to protect it from insects and things like that. Here are three pictures of unacceptable or well casings that need attention. The picture on the left, you can see has been hit by something, either a motorcycle or a snowmobile or possibly a lawnmower or an ATV. Anyway, the well casing is cracked there, and that allows contamination to get into the well. The middle picture depicts or shows the top of the well casing has been constructed so it's even with the ground surface. They brought in fill around the well, and as we explained on that earlier, that well cap is a vented well cap. It is not watertight. So during snow melt and rainfall events, then water can get inside of the well casing and get into the well. If you look at the picture on the right-hand side, the cap must not have been securely attached to the well casing, and possibly frost grabbed a hold of that conduit and pushed it up like that. So that really needs to be fixed there. That provides a big gap for things to crawl in there. So as we said, wellhead protection includes looking at your well, looking at make sure it's in decent repair, prevents bugs and insects from getting in there, as in addition to much larger things that possibly get into the well. As far as wells vulnerability to flooding, the picture on the left is a well that's located in a pit, and the picture of the right is a well that's located near a surface body. We don't allow wells and pits anymore because they're susceptible to flooding, and we do require that wells be separated a distance from surface water to prevent water from coming over the top of the well casing and entering into the well. As far as inside of the house, some of your well's vulnerable points are for the plumbing system would be the water softener discharge. If you look at the picture on the left-hand side, the water softener discharge is discharging directly into a sewer line. Bacteria can enter that discharge line and work its way back into the water softener. On the right-hand side, the discharge for the water softener is being discharged directly into the floor drain, where sewage can back up into also. What we like to see with these systems are some sort of a backflow prevention. If you look on the left-hand side, there's an air gap provided there so that the pipe is not submerged in the floor drain. And on the right-hand side, there's the discharge for the water softener has its own designated pipe that leads out to the grounds, out to the outside of the building, and that is not connected up to the sewer system at all. It's its own designated drain for the water softener. Boilers can be installed inside of buildings, and they can sometimes hooked up to the water supply so that they could use makeup water to fill up the boiler. That's okay as long as they're protected by the proper backflow prevention. And that what is the plumbing code would address what is necessary there for proper backflow prevention. A little bit about water testing. We recommend that you get your water tested by a certified lab. We recommend that coliform bacteria get tested once every year, nitrate every other year, arsenic at least once, lead at least once, and then manganese before a baby will drink the water. As far as getting information on water testing, you could talk to your local environmental services or public health services if they provide water well testing. If they don't provide the testing itself, they may be able to point you in the direction of a certified lab. If you want to go do a internet search, you can search by well testing results and options, and that will lead you to the state health department's website, and it will provide you with all you need to know as far as water quality testing, where the certified labs are located, what we recommend for testing, how to collect the water sample, and things along that line. Coliform bacteria are one of the things you test for, and any coliform bacteria that are detected is unacceptable. It indicates the presence of possibly other infectious bacteria and viruses and parasites. These pathogens can cause diarrhea, vomiting, cramps, nausea, fever, and fatigue. Sources could be recently work done on the plumbing, or else maybe a damaged well casing or well cap, as we previously discussed. If coliform bacteria are detected, you want to make sure you get your drinking water from a safe source. Again, you want to take a look at your system and do an inspection, make sure there's no broken caps or broken conduits or broken casings that contamination could enter into there. And then you want to disinfect your well water or hire a licensed contractor, or you can follow the MDH instructions to do that. Nitrate is another chemical that we're testing for. It primarily affects infants under the age of 6 months. The drinking water standard is set at 10 milligrams per liter. Nitrate, what nitrate does, it affects the ability of baby's blood to carry oxygen from the lungs to the tissues. So it causes a condition called methemoglobinemia or blue baby syndrome. And the blue baby syndrome is an indicator that when the tissues do not receive enough oxygen, they do get a blue tinge in color. So that's where that term comes from. Sources of nitrate could be agricultural or residential fertilizers, human or animal wastes. Every well that is constructed in Minnesota does get tested for nitrate. If you look on the map on the left-hand side, it indicates where the new wells and the concentrations of the nitrate are located. You look at central Minnesota there, they have a lot of elevated nitrate on some of the newer wells. If you look at the map on the right-hand side, it's a map put together by the Minnesota Department of Agriculture, where they went in and sampled new and existing wells for nitrate. They targeted areas that used were susceptible to groundwater contamination, and they also were looking for intense row crop production. And those two determinants were evaluated, and then the wells were tested in those areas, and that was what that map depicts where the results are. So what do you do if your nitrate is above 10? You want to get your drinking water from a safe source. Obviously, you don't want to give the water to infants under the age of 6 months. You could inspect your drinking water system and possibly remove any source of contamination. Maybe you have some fertilizer that got spilled next to the well, or maybe there's a field that they're heavily doing agricultural work on, so that is the source of contamination. Or it could be too close to your sewer system also, which is another source of nitrate contamination. So you want to consider removing that potential source of contamination, or you can drill in a deeper, more protected well below a clay confining layer that'll protect the well more from the surface water contamination. If you choose to do home water treatment, reverse osmosis, distillation, or anion exchange are approved methods. Arsenic is another contaminant that's naturally occurring in the groundwater. Each new well that's constructed gets tested for arsenic, and any level of arsenic is considered a concern, but the drinking water standard is set at 10 milligrams per liter, or 10 micrograms per liter. The health impacts are over a long periods of time. You see the health impacts. So by taking a drink or two of water that does have arsenic in it is not going to create any adverse health effects unless it's really significantly high. So it's a long-term exposure is what we're concerned with here. You do run the risk of increased risk of cancer of the bladder, lungs, and liver, reduced intelligence in children, diabetes, and heart disease. And like I said before, arsenic is naturally occurring in the soil. It's in the soil and the rock below the ground surface. It was brought in by the glaciers tens of thousands of years ago. And there are other areas that were formerly used for pesticides and preserved wood with arsenic, but they're much less common. Most of the arsenic that we're finding in new constructed wells is coming from a source that's naturally occurring. That doesn't mean it's any less toxic. It just means that it isn't a fault of anybody. Here's a map of the arsenic tests that we have done since 2008 when we started requiring arsenic testing. As you see, West Central Minnesota has elevated arsenic, and Central Minnesota also has a large area of elevated arsenic. If you look on the right-hand side, that map depicts all detectable arsenic that is based on the county level. What do you do if arsenic is detected? You could do home water treatment. Reverse osmosis removes the vast majority of arsenic, not necessarily all of it, but the vast majority of it. Distillation will remove it, or absorptive media such as iron oxide is one of the most common medias that is being used out there. Lead is another thing that we recommend testing for at least once. Any level is considered harmful. Babies, children under the age of 6 months, and pregnant women are at higher risk. I think it's kind of well known that excess lead can damage the brain, kidneys, and nervous systems and slow development of the children. Sources of lead are lead pipes, lead solder, brass components such as faucets and valves, and some other plumbing fixtures. So again, lead is not naturally occurring. Typically, it's leaching from some of the brass components in your water supply. What do you do if lead is detected? The way lead works is if the water sits in the plumbing for an extended period of time, say you go to work and it sits there 6 to 8 hours, or you go to bed at night and it sits there for 6 to 8 hours, it will leach out the lead out of those brass fittings and brass components. And what you want to do is you want to flush that water out of there so that it removes the lead from the plumbing. So you want to let the water run for 30 to 60 seconds. You use the cold water for drinking and cooking because warm water dissolves lead more readily. You could replace the lead component if possible. And home water treatment units include reverse osmosis, distillation, and there's some carbon pitcher pumps that work. Manganese is a contaminant that's come to the forefront just recently. It does affect babies under the age of 1 month, and the drinking water standard for babies, or 1 year, I mean. So the drinking water standard for babies under the age of 1 year old is 100 micrograms per liter. For the adult population, it's 300 micrograms per liter. Again, this is a chronic exposure concern. It isn't acute, so that drinking some water that contains manganese is not going to be harmful. But if you drink it over a long period of time, it can be. There are health and aesthetic impacts, such as risk for drinking water over long. Like I said, drink it over a long period of time. It can cause memory, attention, and motor skill deficiencies. It can lead to some learning problems with children. Again, manganese kind of goes hand in hand with iron. It is naturally occurring in the soil and the rock. We have not done an extensive testing program for manganese, but this is a probability map showing the likelihood that manganese is present in the water at various locations throughout the state of Minnesota. If manganese levels are unsafe, you want to make sure you use a safe source of water for making juice for a baby or mixing up formula. You can consider home water treatment. Water softeners work well for removing manganese. They will remove iron and manganese if they're set up that way. Carbon pitcher filters are also work for manganese removal and distillation. I'd like to go over a little bit about water collection and sampling. As far as the procedure goes, if you do get your water tested, you want to, when you're collecting a sample, you want to collect it as close to the well as possible for regularly used faucets. You want to collect it before the water treatment device. You want to remove the faucet screens and rubber washers. And then you flame the faucet, if possible, or disinfect it with rubbing alcohol to kill any bacteria that may be present there. And then you run the cold water tap at least 5 minutes. So what can you do to help assure that you have a good drinking water system? I think the big thing is to consider, well, if you do have some sort of contamination in your system, where is it coming from? You know, there's different points of entry that we've talked about. It could be coming from the groundwater, such as arsenic or nitrate. And to deal with that, you would possibly have to either do some sort of treatment, or if it's nitrate, you could drill a deeper well. If it's coliform bacteria, you could be coming from a broken or an inadequate wellhead construction. Something on the ground surface got bumped, or maybe you did some service work. Maybe a plumber came in and did some service work and did disinfect the system quite well enough. It could be coming from plumbing components such as lead. You could consider where those lead components are and remove them. Otherwise, it could be coming from a plumbing cross connection like we talked about with the water softeners or the boiler systems that are in the house. To help protect your private drinking water, we use the acronym TIPS. We want to have you test your water, inspect your well, protect your well, and seal unused wells. Oftentimes I get numerous calls as far as where can I get more information on my well. One place you can go to is on the internet. If you do an internet search for Minnesota Well Index, you will have a database that encompasses wells in Minnesota. A lot of if you have an older well, we may not have that record in there, but all the newer wells do get submitted and entered into there. You can search that database by well number, address, and township range and section. One thing I want you to be aware of, that information that's in there is based on the information that was provided at the time of construction. So if an address is changed from a rural route address to a 911 address, it's going to be filed under the rural route number, which makes it a little bit difficult to search for. You almost have to look by township range and section, and then search down the list of wells that are in there and figure out which well is yours. The other option would be to contact the well company who drilled the well. Oftentimes they'll put a sticker by the pressure tank or the control panel with their phone number on there so you will call them when it's time to do service work.
Jeff, we have a few questions here.
Okay.
Ask, how can we have our water tested?
We recommend you have it tested by a certified lab. So you can either go onto our website and find where the certified labs are located and then contact them, or you can do an internet search by certified water testing labs, and you might be able to come up with them that way.
Okay, and I'll send out from information at the end of this as well. Could you describe the kinds of well maintenance you suggest?
Which type maintenance for we?
It says, please describe the kinds of well maintenance you suggest.
Well, if you're getting taste and odor issues, you can chlorinate the well and disinfect the well with chlorine bleach. You want to make sure you run that down to the bottom of the well and get a good disinfection. You can either do that by following our disinfection procedure that we have on our website, or you can hire a licensed contractor to do that. Other maintenance may include pulling the well pump out, but it all depends on what you're trying to fix when you're doing the maintenance.
And hydrogen peroxide systems now being installed into homes.
Yes, there are some in there, and I am not an expert on hydrogen peroxide systems, so I would have to do some follow-up and get back to you as far as what our recommendations are.
And then there's a question, in a newly purchased home, they have a reverse osmosis system, and they've tested their water to ensure the system is working properly, but haven't tested it for nitrates prior to RO treatment. If I test my water prior to treatment and find no issue, is it safe to discontinue using the reverse osmosis system, or is it best to continue using it just in case?
Well, it all depends on what the reverse osmosis system was to do. It could have been, if it was a nitrate issue, it's good to leave it in place. If for some reason it was for basically a taste and odor issue that you had going on, that would be totally at the owner's discretion what they wanted to do. They could decide.
If it was installed to address a nitrogen or arsenic problem, is it possible that the problem has resolved itself?
Possibly, but typically not. It does, once the groundwater does get contaminated or contains arsenic, it takes a while for that to go through the system. So it's unlikely it's going to resolve itself unless you do drill a different well.
And here's one that says, we're advised to pour a gallon into our well to address bacteria, not coliform, coming into the water in the house. Annual treatment of this type was recommended. Is this good advice?
There are other bacteria that can get into the well that have no health effects. One is iron bacteria. The other one is a sulfur-reducing bacteria, which produces a rotten eggs odor. Typically, the sulfur-reducing bacteria is present in the hot water heater. Iron bacteria can be present anywhere throughout the system. And what will happen is once the iron bacteria gets into the system, they're difficult to get rid of. They grow in there and they produce a slimy material that protects them from the chlorine. So you can chlorinate the well to knock it down for a while, but typically it does come back after a period of time.
Okay, those are all the questions I had. Thank you.
Okay, and that's all I have too, so I'm going to turn it over.
Okay, I think I'm back. I hope you guys can all hear me. You let me know, Jeff, if there's any issues. But so we are going to spend the rest of the time now talking about how to keep your septic system operating properly. Jeff Forster, if you bring up the poll about when you should have your septic system maintained, you could do that right now. I'm going to go to the... when it comes to doing maintenance on your septic system, the number one thing to start with is, do you know what's in your backyard? So do you have one tank? Do you have multiple tanks? Do you have a pump in your system? Do you have an effluent filter? Do you have an alarm? So what's in your backyard? Because this will help us answer this next question, right? So when should your septic tank be cleaned? I'll see what you guys think. And kind of the key part of this question, I'm not trying to skew your results right now, but is particularly the word cleaning. There's a difference between having your system looked at and actually having maintenance done on it. So I think we're getting pretty close to most people answering. So we're going to get to this answer. So I think we can close this one. We'll see most people think it's every 3 years, and there's some good reason for thinking that. And the second most popular number was when it's needed. So if you don't know exactly what's in your backyard, I would start with your county or permitting authority. For most people in the state, the people who store that data is the county, but there are some cities and townships that run their own program. So you can always start with the county, and if they're not it, they'll let you know who to contact. And so for most modern septic systems, so that is, again, any septic system that's been installed, since the mid-90s, should have a record for it. If it was put in before that, or for some reason there isn't a record, you could ask your installer or the person who comes to pump your tank. They can likely help you figure out what's in your backyard. If you brought the property, there may have been some property or some information that was passed on when the property changed hands. So with that, we will get into septic system maintenance. So maintenance is mandatory. So we have had a uniform state code since 1996, and that has always required maintenance. There was a code before that, but it was kind of voluntary. But it is always said that systems need to be maintained. So what does that mean? Well, typical maintenance involves cleaning the tank or septic tanks, cleaning the effluent screen if you have one of those, making sure that the alarm works. So you may not have an alarm. So the systems that have an alarm in them are systems that have pumps. So any system that has a pump in it has an extra float in it, and the float on that pump, that extra float, tells you or alarms the panel if the water level gets too high. So it's really indicating that there's something typically wrong with the pump. And it's really good to check that during a maintenance visit, because during that maintenance visit, they then will know that if the pump ever goes out, we would know there's a problem. The last thing is actually walking out over the drain field. So you may be keeping an eye on it, but it's also a great idea for the service provider, the pumper, the maintainer to take a look at that system when they're out there as well, to make sure everything is functioning appropriately. So believe it or not, there are actually devices out there that measure sludge and scum. So if you remember that picture that I showed earlier, that diagram of the tank showed the sludge on the bottom and the scum on the top. So technically, when a tank needs to be cleaned is when it builds up with sludge and scum. So I have some pictures here. The one on the left is actually me out at a site measuring the sludge and scum in a tank, and you can kind of see what I brought up. This is a pretty clean tank. You can see not much sitting on the bottom. Some different devices there on the right side of the picture, right? Showing, and again, this is showing the bottom of the tank, which is how much sludge has built up in there over time. So when they do clean the tank, what they're going to do, and this picture may show what's in your backyard. So that actual manhole riser may be buried. So you can see that one looks like it was buried about 12 inches below the ground. So they dug it up. Now he's using something like a pry bar to push it around, and it does take work. The sludge is heavier material that's, again, sitting on the bottom. So they do need to do some work to get that tank clean. So the goal and the purpose of cleaning the tank is to remove all that sludge and scum. This is done by a licensed and bonded professional. So they are called by the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. They are licensed as maintainers. Typically some flushing and back flushing. Sometimes they'll even use a device that kind of agitates the tank to get it as clean as possible. So tanks can only be cleaned through the manhole. So the picture you here see on the right, you see how there's this pedestal right here, and this is electricity, right? So that tells me that under this one, there's actually a pump that's operating, maybe dosing up to a mound system or to a pressure bed. Then what you'll also see in this picture is right behind that, right here, there's an inspection port. So that's usually a 6-inch diameter pipe. And sometimes with older systems, that may be the only pipe you see. But you can see this little hose, right? That green hose technically can fit down that 6-inch pipe, but there is no way to get the tank clean through that 6-inch pipe. So you either need to have that manhole at grade like you see in the picture, or you need to dig to find it. That is the only way to get that tank cleaned. So also, when you get your tank cleaned, you should be getting a maintenance report. So think of this like when you get your oil changed, how you get like that 20-point inspection and they tell you other things you should consider doing. So this is that report, and it's required. Oh, sorry, you can't see. Sometimes in these presentations, you can see my little arrows, but I'm really just talking about that hose in the tank. But what will be in the report is the date, the gallons that they removed, and is there any leakage? So this report is not going to the county or the city. It's just information that maintainer is passing on to you. Like I think about the last time I got my oil changed, it was right before the winter. And the service tech told me, he goes, "Did you notice that your tires are kind of bald?" And I'm like, "Oh, no, I didn't notice that." But that was really good information. Well, the same thing. Let's say they're out there pumping your septic tank and they notice that your baffle fell off, right? That would be something that certainly you'd want to fix. So a question came in about having, and you'll notice in this picture is straw, right? So this property owner put straw over their system to help protect against freezing. So all of the new systems, so these again are the systems that have been installed since 2010. Those risers at grade, they actually have insulation built into the lids to help deal with freezing. But if you are nervous, straw like this, or they now sell some relatively inexpensive insulating blankets, they're a little less work than this because you can see in this picture, they're actually having to haul the straw away, and that's a lot of straw. That's a bit of work that's going to happen to clear that area. And you do want to clear it because you do want vegetation growing. So, and if you have systems, someone had a question, if you have a system that doesn't have a manhole, I have yet to see a modern septic tank. So that would be put in since the 70s that doesn't have a manhole. It's just usually buried. That's the issue is if they are buried, that's where they need to be found and either dug up every time system needs maintenance. It's something certainly to talk to your pumper about when they're out looking at your system. So when they clean out your tank, where does it go? So a majority of that septage that comes out of those tanks is actually land applied following federal requirements, although some is taken to wastewater treatment plants. That's much more common in the metropolitan area. So what is required with that is it has to be limed to raise the pH to kill bacteria and viruses. It's applied at rates that the vegetation can use the nitrogen. There's setback requirements. There's restrictions on grazing and removing of crops. So it's a very regulated activity. So here shows a picture where they're cleaning an effluent screen off. So the screen is washed off directly into the septic tank. Sometimes people are cleaning those screens like once a year. It's important if they're cleaned anytime other than when it's being pumped, that it be washed off at the front end of the septic tank, because the last thing we would want to do is wash that off and then have it go out to the drain field, because there's a lot of solids that stick on that screen. Screens like this are also something that you can put over the top or you can add into a system, an existing system. if it's something you're interested in. It's something to talk to your maintainer about. So here was the question, how often? The right answer is actually, and I will say the right statewide answer is as needed. So what the state code says is that septic systems, again, need to be evaluated every 3 years. So that is the maximum time period that a system can go without either pumping or have it inspected or looked at. Most of the time, what that means is if someone shows up in a pump truck, they're going to clean out your tank. Generally speaking, having septic tanks cleaned is not that expensive. You could be talking about, and again, we're so varied across Minnesota, but a couple $100, give or take. So for most people, that's not a huge expense every 3 years. But again, if you have a property that's used very lightly, it could be possible it could go longer, but you should still have it looked at every 3 years to make sure everything is working. So that's, if you have a seasonal home or cabin, it's the same as above. And there are people that 3 years is too long. If you have a very heavily used, smaller system, I remember several years ago, my family stayed at a friend of the family's cabin. So it was actually my sister's in-laws cabin. And it was the second year we'd stayed there, and they wouldn't take any money. And I'm like, well, how about we get their tank pumped? It was my gift to them, right? I was excited to get their tank pumped, right? Well, they had a 1,000-gallon septic tank, and it was a 3-bedroom house, but they had a bunk house as well that I was sleeping in. So there were a lot of us using the system, and we used 1,000 gallons of water in 2 days, which was more than that system was designed for. So seasonal homes are sometimes used light, and sometimes they can be used quite heavily. All right, so here was a question asked earlier. Do I need to put anything into my septic system? You really need to flush the toilet. When you flush the toilet, you are giving your septic system everything it needs. Lots of bacteria. So a typical cup of sewage has around 1 million to 1 billion bacteria in it. We are the feeders. We do not fully digest all the organic material that we consume. And finally, the ones that might be the most concerning are cleaners. Our state regulations actually ban the use of products that state, if you use this, you won't need to pump your tank. We want solids to stay in the septic tank. We don't want them going out to the drain field. So we do not recommend the use of these, and it's unfortunate, right? Here's a picture I took at Home Depot. They are sold everywhere. But from my perspective, you're flushing 20s. That we don't have research, particularly third-party research of any kind supporting the use of these products. So I would rather you take that money and use it and have your system cleaned, that every 2, 3, 4 years. So that if you do have a pump tank as part of your system, and if you have a mound, you certainly have one of these, but sometimes people will also have this, for instance, with a pressurized bed system. So that pump, again, pumps are generally very reliable. A typical septic pump, again, is going to last 10 to 15 years before it needs to be replaced. But it will need to be replaced. And so it's always good to confirm that your pump is accessible, meaning that manhole is at grade, that it's not sitting on the bottom of the tank because we don't want it to pump any sludge, that it's replaceable, right? That we can actually pull it out when we need to, that it's working properly and alarmed. And the last thing here again is that the tank may need pumping. So if you do have a tank that has a pump in it, they should always be looking at that. Yeah, as far as your question, why doesn't the state prohibit the sale? It's a really good question. I think it's a really hard thing to enforce. The only one that our state code prohibits directly is the one that says that if you use this, you don't need to pump your tank. So I don't think there's anything in it. Again, it wouldn't necessarily be the MPCA. It would be the people who do like consumer protection. And I would say nationally, there has been even federal level conversation about some of these additives and do their marketing claims actually match up with what they state. But I have yet to hear anything change around in that regard. So how do you go about hiring someone? Word of mouth is always great. And that's not just true in the septic industry, it's true everywhere. Talking to friends or people who are respected in your community is a great way. The MPCA does keep a list of all the licensed professionals. So you'll see if you just Google MPCA SSTS license search. Keep in mind, though, that list is set up by the county that their home address is in. So it's not, and again, I've yet to find a septic professional who only works in one county. So you may want to look at your county and neighboring counties. And then also just having a conversation with them. Do they pump through the manhole? Do they own a sludge judge? That's one of those measuring devices. Do they backflush? Do they recommend additives? We usually start with this last one, right? How much will it cost? But keep in mind, you might be talking about the difference of $20 between one or the other. And from my perspective, it's better to get someone who truly gets your tank clean. And keep in mind, when they leave there, it is not spotless, right? It is a septic tank. There's a little good bacteria left over just to get the tank going again. But in general, we do want them to get that tank as clean as possible while they're out there. So I'd rather hire someone that you trust that's going to do a good job than necessarily the cheapest person. All right, so while they're there, they should be, again, just walking out over your soil treatment system area. That could include replacing cracked or missing inspection pipes, confirming that any sort of rainwater or snow runoff goes away from the drain field. And that is definitely true that we want as much as possible, the stormwater, right, any rainwater, to not have to go through the septic system because we're putting so much water through there already. And also, just as an owner, you should keep an eye on the area that your drain field is. And some of us can see it every day, right, because it's in a very evident place. But sometimes people's septic system is kind of out of sight. So that's why it's a good idea to take a look on an annual basis. So a few other things to keep in mind with your soil treatment system. Compaction is bad. So your system needs to breathe. It needs to get oxygen to it. And when you compact a septic system, what you are doing is you are pushing out the pore space for air to get to your system. So that's why, again, compaction is bad. So you want to keep any sort of traffic. So this would be any vehicular traffic, aside from, again, a small riding lawnmower, and large animals, right? So I have a St. Bernard. That's my dog. So he's right on the edge, right? He's a big guy. But so we're not really talking about Fido generally, but we are talking about any sort of livestock. It's not a good idea to put a salt lick out over your system, even regular deer traffic, because a lot of other animals too, they're just known to walk the same path. And when they do that, they're really compacting the soil. If you do have inspection pipes that are sticking up, several feet in the air, they can be cut off flush. You have a couple options, having that cap flush at the surface or putting them in a nice landscaping box. Again, particularly if you have it in an area where aesthetically you'd rather not see those pipes. Newer mound systems, pressurized systems also do have cleanouts with flush laterals. So that's a way to actually flush out the pipes, which is something to consider having done when your septic tank is being cleaned. So it's something to talk to your pumper about. So the vegetation, and here you'll see in this picture, it's probably kind of small on some of your screens, but in this picture, it's actually some of those inspection ports, those cleanouts on the end of a pressurized mound system. So he's actually checking that they're all squirting to the same height. But what you'll notice in this picture also, those are those landscaping boxes I was talking about that then do sit flush on the surface. So again, what should be growing across your system? In general, we recommend plants that prefer dry soils near the septic system. And the simplest thing to use is turf grass. So turf grass, again, if you think about it, in the middle of a hot summer, it's brown and it looks dead. But in fact, it will come back, right? So we don't want to plant something that needs to be irrigated, that needs a lot of water. We don't want to put our vegetable garden there primarily because it needs watering and it leaves the soil bare come winter. Also, you should never plant anything woody out over your septic system. So no trees or shrubs of any kind directly on top of your system. And I'd also think about keeping those at a distance, which we'll talk about here in a second. So it's okay to frame the system with trees and shrubs. We recommend trees should be planted at least 20 feet away from the edge of a mound or a drain field. I would say, though, if you have trees that are known for seeking water and being quite aggressive, I recently saw a huge mass of tree roots that got in through a very small diameter into a septic tank, and it was from an elm. So poplars, maple, willow are known to can be quite evasive. They do have to have a way in, and most of our newer systems don't have a way in. Also, if you're interested in landscaping options, we do have a good fact sheet on our website. So again, these are examples of problems. The one is a coffee can, right, that's covering an inspection port. Four-wheelers, snowmobiles are all a problem. The picture you'll see there is a drain field that doesn't have anything growing on it. As far as particularly with existing systems, often when an existing system goes in, there will be trees closer than 20 feet. Usually, again, you're kind of limited by constructability to being too close to them. But I would not cut down a tree unless it was causing problems during, again, either the installation process or it's getting into the system and causing problems. But so there are, I would say, many, many septic systems that have a tree closer than 20 feet. So, but when we're telling people if you're going to plant new trees, it's better not. And the reason why, there's a couple of reasons why it's better not. One, never over the top, right? But even, let's say it's 10 feet away. Keep in mind, when that tree is little, it won't be growing over the top of the system. But as that tree gets bigger and bigger, it's going to start shading it out. Actually having some good sunlight over the top of that system has some benefit. Also, if you did want to plant trees closer to your septic system, I would also think about smaller ornamental trees, right? It'd be a good place for a flowering crab or something that's not going to end up being 100 feet tall. So you do not necessarily have to remove trees unless they're causing an issue. So the rest of our time here, we're going to talk more about things that you can do in your house to extend the life of your septic system. So we're going to get into some details, but this kind of hits the highlight. The first one is to think about how much water you use. The less water that's going through your septic system, the more detention time you're going to have in your tank and out in the soil. Do think about also how you use water. So spreading water out over the day and even over the course of a week. So the best example of this is avoiding Saturday laundry day, right? Where you do all your laundry in one day for the whole family. You're running the dishwasher, you're taking showers. That's what you want to try to avoid. So if you can space out some of that laundry, and we all know that most of our homes are going to have higher days of water usage. That's okay, but we just don't really want to pound the system on one given day if we can avoid it. And that may happen once or twice a year, right? You have a bunch of family over or things like that, but we just don't want to do that on a regular basis. Think about the products you use and limit cleaners. I didn't say eliminate, but just think about what are you putting down the drain and is there a way to use less of it and still keep your home healthy? Do not use your system as a garbage can. And really, this is definitely an ongoing problem. It's been a recent issue that's come up even more just with the current epidemic, as people have been using more of those sanitizing wipes. They are not flushable, but some people think they are, right? So that stuff, anything besides toilet paper, and we'll get more into toilet paper coming up here, but anything besides toilet paper and human waste should be going into your garbage can, or if you're talking about your kitchen sink, should be going into your compost pile. and not into your septic system. The last one here is if you are having any sort of problem. So your alarm's going off, your drains are running slow, you're smelling issues, right? That is, again, where you want to talk to someone. Don't wait for a big problem. So when it comes to the products we use in our home, the number one thing that causes problems with septic systems is things that are sanitizers, things that are designed to kill bacteria, kill viruses. And that has been one thing I've just been a little bit worried about. I want everyone to be healthy. Don't get me wrong. But to the same degree, I hope not a lot of that is going down the drain into people's septic systems. Because if you think about anything that's labeled antibacterial, the antibacterial product doesn't know who the good bacteria are and the bad bacteria, right? They just kill bacteria. And so you'll see antibiotic soaps and wipes are now used by 3/4 of American households. And as you put more and more sanitizer in your system, it can have a cumulative impact on septic system performance. So the products that we use around our home do have labels. They're not labeled for septic systems. They're labeled for public health. So sometimes you will see products that have a poison or a danger symbol on them. This means that the chemical will kill the bacteria and its use should be minimized or eliminated. If it has a warning on it, if you use it in normal amounts, and that is the hard thing, is to distinguish what's normal usage. But like, I'll give the example of bleach, right? So if you do a load of whites, let's say a week or a month, and you use some bleach in it, is it going to kill off your entire septic system? And the answer is no, it's not that easy, right? So, and the last one is things that just have a cautionary on them. So something like cleanser will have very little impact. So we want to, as much as possible, choose products that are the least toxic. And again, keep in mind, I mentioned these labels are for public health, but if it's better for public health, it's also better for your septic system. So a nice resource is the Environmental Working Group. So this is a nonprofit organization that rates products. They actually, so you can use it kind of two ways. One is you can look up your favorite product and see what grade it gets. So they give things an A, B, C, D, or F. Again, for public health and the environment. So they do take in environmental considerations. So what I can tell you, though, is if a product gets an A, that is something, again, that will be better for your septic system than something that gets a C. So you can look up your favorite product, or you could just look at what are the A laundry soaps out on the market, right? Things along those lines. And the nice thing is it's a nonprofit. They're not in this to make money. They're in this to provide information for consumers. So if you can see the address, otherwise, if you Google Environmental Working Group. So they do household products, they do cosmetics, they do all kinds of things. All right, so with that, we'll move into water use. So the first number here you'll see is a peak loading. So 150 gallons per day per bedroom is what we use when we design a new system. It assumes you could have 2 people living in each bedroom of a home. So for most homes, that overestimates the amount of people. But so if you had a 3-bedroom, right, you would be at 450 gallons, or a 4-bedroom home, right, would be 600 gallons. So that is the amount that might happen the day you have everybody over. Let's say we can all get together for the 4th of July, right? We can dream of having a get together then, or you have graduation or the holidays. That isn't your regular amount. It's really that peak loading. So the typical person, again, does use 50, 60 gallons of water per day. So if you were the typical person, right, that's 28,000 gallons. And now let's say you have 3 people living in a house. Average household puts out about 70,000 gallons of water a year. And now think about your backyard. Think about the size of the drain field that you have, or your mound system. That's a lot of water, right? And now think about your lake or your river that you live nearby or on. let's say there's 250 homes around a lake, 15 million gallons of water a year. So that's why it's so important that septic systems be working properly, be properly maintained, is to protect our resources. So where do we use this water? So this study again came out in 2016. That's where that water use information came from as well. So you'll see most of our water is used in the bathroom. The #1 water user is our toilets. Then the second one behind that would be bathing, right? Mainly in our showers, very little in bathtubs. So you'll see about 20% in the shower. And then right behind that, you'll see our faucets and then our clothes washer. So we're going to kind of look at each of these. So looking at this picture, that toilet you see on the right, if that's what your bathroom looks like, both your septic system and your realtor would like you to remodel, right? So by now, pink toilets maybe have come back. But the problem with those older toilets is they use 5, 6, 7 gallons every time they flush. So recent advancements now allow toilets to use 1.28 gallons per flush or less. I recently installed a dual flush toilet, right? So when it's urine only, it uses 0.7 gallons. The biggest problem, again, with toilets, though, really is the running. So if you are wondering if your gasket totally seals, sometimes you can feel it running, right? And you'll jiggle the handle some. But if you put a drop of food coloring in the back, the question is, does it break through? So again, recommended toilet cleaners, not your dog probably, right? My St. Bernard would make a mess on the toilet. But the biggest thing about the toilet is not to constantly sanitize your toilet. So in the past, this would be the ones that would make your toilet bowl blue. There's even some now that have are colorless, but every time you flush, they sanitize. So when you do this, the downside is that you're constantly sanitizing your septic system. So for many people, they really just need once a week to use a brush or maybe a light abrasive such as baking soda or Bon-Ami. Otherwise, some people do have issues with lime and hard water deposits, and sometimes that can be removed with hot white vinegar, barkeeper's friend, a Shaw's pad, or a pumice stick. In general, using a little bit of elbow grease is better. So there was a question that came in, is it suggested to have a toilet set up to use gray water if possible? So the concept of using, so if you remember that first picture, I'm not going to go back because it's too many slides ago. So gray water is defined as the water that is anything other really than your toilet. So this would be shower water, laundry water. So the question is, can I use my gray water to flush my toilets? Currently in Minnesota, that requires an exemption to the plumbing code. And it's really, I mean, so I know, for instance, they're doing this at Vermilion State Park, but they have to take that gray water and treat it. Because if you start to reuse water within your home, there are actually standards that need to be met. So I'm assuming the person who messaged me is in Minnesota. So it's really not something that our regulations really are set up or allow currently in Minnesota. It could be down the road that there might be more flexibility, but I would say right now we need more experience or more data to be able to do that. All right, so with that, so what should go in the toilet bowl? So someone asked me about toilet paper. So I have yet to find a toilet paper that doesn't break down. So if you are, again, someone who is concerned about, is your toilet paper okay? Take what you would normally use, put it into a glass like mason jar, put the lid on it with some water and shake it. And it should start to break down. Toilet paper does not just, it is designed in septic systems to break down. So I have yet, even with like quilted, triple ply, northern, it breaks down. But what doesn't break down is Kleenex, paper towel, wipes, Q-tips, cigarettes, hair, cotton balls, feminine products, prophylactics, and certainly also not unused medication. So really, again, there is toilet paper that's labeled septic safe. It's just marketing. There's nothing behind that. So I wouldn't necessarily be concerned about that. I mean, I've even been looking, as many of us have been looking at toilet paper, and I was looking online and it said septic safe. And it's just to let people know that it's not going to cause a problem. But unless your toilet paper isn't breaking down, it's not going to be a problem. So this is kind of what I just talked about, right? Toilet bowl cleaners, kitty litter. Usually what it means is they'll flush. It doesn't mean anything else. And no one regulates that term. They can put it on any product. So moving into bathing. So here you want to fix leaks. Low flow shower heads are great if you can find a good one, and I think they've gotten better. Avoid sanitizing your shower. So there are shower sprays now that really advocate that you use it every day. Avoid antibacterial soaps. Again, they're no more effective at, for instance, deactivating viruses and bacteria. Limit the use of lots of oils in your system. And in general, bar soap is better because you use less soap. Again, a question came in about Kleenex. Kleenex do not break down the same way toilet paper does, unless maybe you were using really thin Kleenex. Every Kleenex I've tried, if you do that jar test, it's just more tightly woven and it doesn't break down. Drain cleaner recommendations. So if you are having troubles with drains running slow, often where it's slow is right in that elbow underneath the sink. So you really do want to try to catch as much as possible. And this is also true if you have a lot of long hair and soaps plugging up things. Just trying to catch as much of it as possible. Sometimes if it is underneath the sink, it can be relatively easy to clear that. Sometimes you also might need to hire a professional to come in and snake the line. All of those are much better than using a lot of the products that you'll find at the hardware store. Products like Drano can really kill off. They really do kill off a lot of bacteria in the system. So there are DIY solutions for all kinds of things that can work. And I would tell you, if what your solution is putting something into the system that is edible, so salt and baking soda, I'm not worried about. If you told me you were putting a cup of salt into your system every single day, I might be more concerned because, again, salt isn't necessarily great for bacteria. But if it's a one-time occurrence of something that, in fact, is something edible, or using things around your house like vinegar, are much more natural solutions that are easier for our systems to deal with. So the next time it's time to buy a washing machine, certainly consider a front-loading washing machine, or even an efficient top loader. They use 65% less water, right? So they went from an old one using 40 plus gallons a day down to 12 to 20. In the long run, I know they're more expensive up front, but you actually use electricity to use less electricity to dry your clothes, so they pay for themselves. And also certainly think about spreading out your loads. Another thing with your washing machine to consider is that more lint comes off in your washer than your dryer. So we all clean the dryer lint out, right? You have to. But most of us do not have a way currently to filter our laundry waste. So some examples here you'll see in the picture. The one on the right, again, is a screen on the end. The one on the left is actually a Minnesota-based company. And again, I don't work for them. You know, there's no kickbacks here, but it is an aftermarket lint filter. And you will be amazed how much lint is coming off your clothing. And much of that lint is not organic in nature. It's not cotton and wool. It's synthetic fibers, right? Lycra, spandex, you name it. So here's why we want to avoid that Saturday laundry day, is if you have heavy flows coming in, the risk is that turbulence that you see in the tank could cause some of your sludge and scum to go out to your drain field. So what kind of soap? You want to limit your bleach usage, and also think about how much laundry detergent you use. A lot of the laundry products now are super concentrated, right? They say right on the label that this normal size container does 100 loads. but yet the cap on the top is giant. So particularly when you have softer water, you really should think about, can I use half of that amount, right? Also be careful, some of the inexpensive powder products contain clay as a filler, and clay does not like to settle out and it could plug up your soil. We do not recommend the use of liquid fabric softeners in particular. The liquid fabric softeners can affect the stratification of the tank. So again, if you want to use a fabric softener, using the dryer sheets is a better option. Otherwise, some natural solution, again, baking soda or vinegar, dryer balls, and aluminum foil ball will help. Again, homemade soap, someone commented, that's a great option. The less soap going into your system, the better. That's what I can also tell you. So the comment here was they're only using 1 tablespoon. And I would suspect that, again, if you look online, I looked for them myself, it's relatively easy to find our recipes also to make your own soap. So the kitchen. I've had a lot of questions lately about pods for laundry and dishwashing. My first comment is you have no way to actually control how much soap you use. So you're maybe using more soap than you need. There's no studies to date that have shown any problem with the pods, although I do believe there is some plastic in that may not, the risk is it fully degrading? Is it building up anywhere in your system? But the main reason I don't like them is I just don't think you need to use as much soap as they are likely putting in one of those pods. So moving on to your dishwasher. Dishwashers don't use a lot of water in our house, but if you want to be the most efficient with them, run them full. The detergent, again, use a low phosphorus, no phosphorus soap there. Don't use it like a garbage can, right? So scraping your plates. Probably the biggest issue we run into still is that people put too many fats and oils down the drain. So those really need to be dealt with your solid waste. So a question came up about garbage disposals. I am not a big fan of garbage disposals in general. I actually live in the city here, and I had my kitchen redone, and the gentleman doing our kitchen could not believe I didn't want a garbage disposal, but I'm like, no, I want to compost that waste. I don't want to send it to the wastewater treatment plant. So if you're on a septic system, the problem of garbage disposals are they add more solids, right? So you are going to be putting more waste down the drain. That waste hasn't been digested, right? So it hasn't gone through my gut. So the bacteria have to work a lot harder. The other thing is it breaks that into very small pieces, and those pieces do not settle out as well. You're also adding more water. That's probably the least of the issues. So the recommendation is don't install one. If you have one, don't use it or don't use it much. It also does require that your septic system be larger. So 50% more septic tank capacity. So it will cost you both the garbage disposal up front, which they're not that expensive, but it'll make your septic tank to be larger as well. So one of our attendees provided a comment that a dishwasher repair person said that those pods are terrible. And their comment was way too much soap. You only need a teaspoon per load. And again, same comment with washing machines. That is the nice thing I've noticed about this compared to doing this in person. All of your, I'm actually getting a lot more feedback than I get when we're doing this in person. So I may not be able to see all your smiling faces, but I certainly do appreciate how engaged you are in the presentation. So a few last things here as we're wrapping up. Other sources of water that shouldn't go into a septic system, your sump pump or tile line discharge, dehumidifier discharge. I don't know if it's that big a deal here in Minnesota. Some of this, again, we do presentations even all over the US. That's probably a much bigger issue in much more humid climates where it would be a lot more water. High efficiency furnace discharge. The big risky issue with that is people who leave their furnace on and then leave for weeks or months because it's a small volume of water that can cause freezing issues. Yeah, I've had several comments about winter, and we'll get to that here at the end. Roof runoff, dripping faucets, and running toilets. Those are all things that, again, shouldn't go into your septic system. So I did want to touch on water softeners because it's a common question that does come up at these events. And what I can tell you is the less chloride that goes into your septic system, the better. So if you have a water softener, and most Minnesotans with septic systems do, you do want to have the most efficient water softener you can. So if you have an older model, an older unit, it's very likely that if you got a new one, you would greatly decrease the amount of salt going into your system. So how to assure this is to have your water softener set for how hard your water is and actually have it serviced. So again, if your softener's never been serviced, it might be time for that visit, right? So they recommend that they be looked at every 5 years. And that regeneration water is where where a majority of the salt is, right? To regenerate your water softener, they send this brine of salty water over the resin that's in your softener. If you can run that somewhere else and not into your septic system, that would be better. So that could go into a separate drain field or rock pit. It could go to the surface, not directly into a lake, river, or stream. And keep in mind that will run in the middle of winter, so you can have freezing and vegetation issues. And if you want to know more about softeners, we have a great part of our website that actually deals specifically with softener recommendations. A couple other things to mention. Iron filters are becoming more common. It's really recommended with iron filters to divert them out of your septic system because they actually form an iron precipitate. It's a little different than how softeners work. If not, you might need to pump your tank more often. And reverse osmosis isn't a huge issue unless you have an entire home one. So most people just have reverse osmosis for under the sink, right? So when it's just under your sink, that's not creating that much wastewater. So you'll see here, for every gallon of water made, there's approximately 3 gallons of wasted water. So you can think about if you were doing that for your house and you were making 200 gallons a day, that would be 600 gallons of wastewater. So a septic system owner's guide. So this is something when we do this event in person that we actually hand out. There's a kind of abbreviated version of this on our website that you can take a look at. So if you go to that web address I sent and you went under information for property owners, you'll find a lot more information about septic system in general. And I do want to just talk about the issue of people leaving for the winter. So there is actually also a section on our website that is specifically geared towards people who do leave. Many people who do leave going into the winter shut down their water and sewer. So that actually isn't very hard on septic systems because, again, they're really shut off for the winter. The harder ones are the ones that people use intermittently. So people who leave for a week or a couple weeks at a time, and that can be much harder on septic systems. And I talked about the issues of high efficiency furnaces. So when people are concerned about freezing, we do have some guidance specifically about how to avoid freezing with septic systems. But keep in mind, if you're only going to use it for one weekend out of the winter, that's really hard. So someone had a very specific question about a specific softener that uses less salt. Just keep in mind, almost every manufacturer now who makes water softeners that use salt, there are even some non-salt options, but the ones that do use salt, most of them use way less salt than older models. And it really comes down to how they regenerate. So old softeners would be set to regenerate every 2, 3, 4 days. And now the smart ones actually regenerate based on your usage. And that's why they use so much less salt. So again, kind of wrapping this up here, what can you do to protect our water? And just keep in mind, I know this picture is pretty small right now, but all of our water is connected. So most of you probably have some beverage in front of you right now, coffee, tea, water, whatever it might be. You know, that water has been used before, right? The question is, what was it used for? And me being who I am, I think it was probably used to flush a toilet, right? So that's what I keep in mind, and why I enjoy my work so much is I want to make sure that when we all flush the toilet, the next time that water needs to be used again, that it's going to be safe, right, for someone else to use. So what you can do, right, you can think about how much water you use. Maintain your septic system and your well, because there's a direct connection if we're not managing those well between those. And we also want to protect our lakes, but we also want to protect our health. Make sure any unused pharmaceuticals and hazardous waste are taken to the appropriate drop-off spot. And I was so happy to see so many of you here today, but we need to keep doing more of this, right? We need more people to have the connection between what they're putting down the drain, whether they live in the city or have a septic system, and our water. It's interesting research I've seen. Most Minnesotans feel a very strong tie to a water resource. So often, though, there still seems to be a disconnect. So the fact that you're all here means you already are connected, but we need to get more people on board. So talking to your friends and family about all of this. So the other thing that you may have seen advertised with this course is that if you would like to get a well testing kit, so normally at the class now we would hand them out. You can actually get one. And Jeff is like, well, can't we do this for the webinar? And I'm like, I don't know how to do that. But I reached out to the lab we've been using, and basically what they're going to do is if you contact them, and we're going to get you that information, they're going to mail you out a test kit that will test for bacteria, nitrates, and arsenic. And we have a grant from MDH to cover the cost. Make sure when you get it, it's going to have very detailed instructions about how and where to collect your sample. So the samples will need to be collected and then mailed overnight. And the postage, again, is included. And the lab, when you contact them, will provide the best way to return the bottles based on your address. So this name and email you see here is also going to come in an email. So I'm going to leave it up here for a minute so you can write it down now, or like I said, Jeff will be emailing it out, but you're going to contact them either by phone or email. And honestly, I think email might be the easier route, but if you're not an emailer, and tell them you're part of this program, so the University of Minnesota, and that will cover the cost. The question about rock salt versus pellets and granules. If it is the salt, if it was salt that was designed for water softeners, it goes. The email address is on the slide right now, and if you can't see the slide, Jeff will email it out if you're on the email list. So this is the email for the test kit that I have. So it's the Tracy Borash email that's on this slide. The way that the salt works is it goes into a solution. So as long as it was designed for softeners, they should all be dissolving into the water. That's what it does. So as long as it's designed for the purpose. How is a catch basin installed? So this really looks at like the screen or grate that you have over a sink. The one example I'll have, like at my old house, for instance, where our laundry water was going in, there wasn't really no screen. It was just a regular drain. So very often you can get a screen that kind of sits inside that will catch more debris. So you could potentially look at replacing or adding those into sinks. In showers, it might be a lot harder because you very likely might have to basically take that apart. So, oh yeah. So Jeff put a note here. Thanks, Jeff, for those if you couldn't see this slide. So Jeff, as questions have been coming by, I've been trying to answer them. Were there any that I missed?
There's a couple that came in.
While you look. So what is the process for replacing a failing septic system? So the real process is you need to hire a septic system designer. So they will come out and look at your property or what system you need. That same person might be the person who installs your system, or in some areas, people will then take that design and have several installers bid on it. So if you know someone, anyone in the industry, you know an installer that you plan to use, I would reach out to them first and see if they'll design it, or if they have a designer they work with. You could try contacting the county along those lines too if you don't have a list to start with. Often they'll have the list of people who work in your area regularly. But I would try to go through, again, recommendations or word of mouth whenever possible, to find someone that other people have had good experience with. It's never a bad idea, too, if you're hiring someone, to reach out to someone who's worked with them before, right? Use referrals, too, so.
A couple of these questions are, can you pump a septic system too often?
That is not usually the problem we have. If I had $1 for every time I've heard I've never pumped my septic tank, it makes me cringe, because that's not something to be proud of. So I do know of a few people, for instance, that they have just decided they're going to pump their tank every year. It's easier for them once a year. Most people aren't going to need it. Is it really hurting their system? Well, when your tank is empty, it does take a little while for the bacteria to kind of get equilibrated. So if I were one of those people that was on the annual pumping, I would just ask my pumper maintainer next time they're out, did I need to get it pumped? How full was my tank? Because when your tank technically needs to be pumped is when more than 25% of the depth was storing sludge and scum. So if your tank was really clean when they came out, then you could maybe go 2 years. So it's not something I would lose much sleep over.
And then must you live in Minnesota to take advantage of water testing?
Yes.
Even if the property is located in Minnesota.
Oh yeah, as long as it's Minnesota water. Yeah, I guess the only issue will be, I mean, you have to be here to collect the sample to put it in the jars. So, so if someone was still not back home in Minnesota, keep in mind though, you do have a month. I can envision there are some people that aren't home maybe right now that may be trying to get their way back to Minnesota in the next month or so. So you could certainly have it shipped out, but you're going to have to somehow get to your property and have the bottles filled up at the property, if that makes sense. You get those sludge measuring devices. They are about a couple $100. So I don't know if most homeowners are going to want to buy one. But if you go online and Google like sludge measuring device, like the term sludge judge, you'll see them come up. But I do think they run a couple $100.
And then I did get a question on, can a lake association require county zoning mandatory septic system checks to address the cabins that have been on the lake for 30 to 50 years? I know that home sales require inspections. Estimates are in the county that 3 to 5% of the faulty septic systems cause increased lake loading. And so that's kind of a difficult issue. Yes, you can go to the county, but when you do that, then it becomes a political issue and it becomes more controversial. And so I really think with a lake association, the role that a lake association can play, without pitting, one side of the membership against the other side, is to do this kind of education. Educate people as to the connection between their septic and the lake and water quality, and maybe educate people about phosphorus blooms in the lake and why they might be increasing. Educate people about the number of septic systems that might be non-compliant. Educate people about the fact that there's low or no interest loans, and work through the lake association with that peer pressure to get the people on the lake where they want to get their system checked. Often, you ask, can we check your, would you like us to check your septic system? And they're afraid that it means they're going to have to replace it. And so they'll say, no, don't check it. They don't want to know. And so with that education over a year or two, I've seen lake associations that approach this more cautiously, with education first, have better results than those that just go into the county board and say, we need to do this and everybody has to meet these requirements. And then people who don't feel that way show up and it turns into a political struggle. So if people want to talk to me more about this, just send me an email or give me a call. You can get my information on our website.
There's also been some funding available to counties to do inventory projects.
Yes.
And that helps sometimes because that can cover a lot of the cost of doing an inventory around a lake in particular. So that's something that would be more to talk to the county about, is if you can get some support around your lake to say, we want to protect our lake. We want to have good septic systems. Can we do an evaluation? And if there can be some resources to help cover it, it can help some people get on board.
Right. And there's one county in particular where they got those resources in place to do the inspections for free, and then did a 2-year program of reaching out to people one-on-one to start educating them about this issue and the benefits to the lake, and were able to get 100% compliance on the lake. But it took a couple years. Other counties, I've seen this blow up and lake associations divided, and so they don't get the septics compliant, and they kind of have a negative impact to the association in the process.
Yeah, there was a question that came in, is if you're leaving for the winter, should you have your tank pumped before you leave? And my answer to that is no. There's kind of 2 reasons. The biggest is an empty tank sitting in the ground, if you live in an area with a high water table, can actually get pushed out of the ground. It can be actually buoyant. The second thing is there's just the only reason to do that. So I have there is that if you plan to use your system some over the winter and we're going to basically fill it up, and you were worried because you use it so limitedly it would freeze. So besides that, there's just really no reason. Again, unless you were leaving your furnace hooked up and it was going to be this slow dribble of water out. But if you really were shutting down the system before winter, there's no reason to get it pumped.
Well, Sarah and Jeff, thank you so much for this. And look for an email from me. I have a 3:30 appointment, so it won't be right away, but it'll be pretty soon. With further information.
Our email addresses are both here, so if people have any follow-up questions on either septics or wells, my email address and Jeff's email address. But I really want to thank you for hosting this. From my perspective, it went very smoothly, so I hope it went well for all of you too out there.
Yeah, we had almost 100 people on, so that's great. And thank you, Jeff.
Yes, thank you for having me.
And everybody stay safe and be healthy. And thank you so much for your interest in this.
Thanks.